Hello everyone, this is your guy John again, back with another true crime story. One that isn't just about violence, but about fear, frustration, and the fragile line that separates community from chaos. Tonight, we travel to a quiet Florida neighborhood that looked like the picture of peace, manicured lawns, kids on bicycles, neighbors who waved at each other every evening. But behind those cheerful hellos and weekend barbecues, tension had been building for years, and in June 2023, it exploded. Ajike Owens was the kind of woman who lit up a room. She was 35, a single mother raising 4 beautiful children on her own in Ocala, Florida. She worked hard, loved harder, and believed in kindness, the kind of neighbor who would lend you sugar, check in on your family, or help organize a school fundraiser even when she was exhausted from a double shift. Those who knew her described her as fearless, nurturing, and fiercely protective of her kids. She wasn't famous, she wasn't wealthy, but she mattered deeply to the people who loved her. The neighborhood she lived in, known as Marion Oaks, wasn't a dangerous one. It was a place where families sought quiet lives, away from the noise of the city. But like many communities across America, unseen tensions sometimes simmered under the surface. Cultural differences, misunderstandings, unspoken prejudice. And between AJ and one of her neighbors, the tension had turned into something darker. That neighbor was a woman named Susan Lorincz, 58 years old, living just a few houses away. At first, she seemed ordinary. A single woman who mostly kept to herself, sometimes complained about noise, sometimes glared from her porch. But over time, small disagreements grew into bitter exchanges. Suzanne would yell at AJ's children when their ball rolled into her yard. She would accuse them of trespassing, of being too loud, of not respecting boundaries. Neighbors say she called the police more than once, but nothing ever came of it. To AJ, it felt like harassment. To Susan, it felt like control slipping away. On June 2nd, 2023, the sun began to set over Marion Oaks, painting the houses in soft orange light. AJ's children were outside playing, their laughter floating through the air. For a brief moment, life was normal, but inside Susan Lorintz's home, anger was simmering. According to later statements, she claimed the children were being too loud, too close to her property. She shouted at them, threw a pair of roller skates that one of the kids had left near her yard, and cursed out loud. The children ran home, frightened and crying. They told their mother that the neighbor had screamed at them again, and this time, she had thrown something. Ajay's maternal instinct took over. She didn't go there to start a fight. She went there to protect her children, to ask why an adult would treat them that way. She walked across the street to Susan's house and knocked on the front door. Inside, Susan was already on edge. She later said she was scared, that she believed AJ was trying to break in. But there was no sign of forced entry, no threat, just a mother asking questions. Then came a sound that shattered the peace of that Florida night. A single gunshot. Neighbors heard it echo down the street. When deputies arrived, they found AJ Owens lying on the ground near the front door of Susan Lorintz's home, a gunshot wound in her chest. She was rushed to the hospital, but doctors couldn't save her. She died, leaving behind 4 children, the youngest only 3 years old. The story spread fast. At first, reports were confusing. A neighborhood dispute, a tragic misunderstanding. But as details emerged, the public outcry grew louder. Why had a simple confrontation ended with a mother dead? Why had it taken days for an arrest? And why did this story sound so painfully familiar in a country already haunted by similar tragedies? When investigators questioned Susan Lorincz, she claimed she acted in self. She said AJ was banging on her door, yelling, and trying to break in. She said she feared for her life. But the evidence didn't match her story. There were no broken locks, no damaged door, no sign that AJ was armed. Witnesses said AJ had never entered the house at all. She was shot through the closed front door, unarmed, standing outside, with her children watching from a few feet away. For AJ's family, it was unbearable. Her mother, Pamela Diaz, spoke publicly through tears. "My daughter didn't deserve to die like that. Her babies watched her take her last breath." Those words echoed across social media and news broadcasts nationwide. Protesters gathered outside the Marion County Courthouse, demanding justice. Civil rights leaders, including the Reverend Al Sharpton, called for accountability. Even the local sheriff, Billy Woods, acknowledged the case touched a deep nerve. Woods said in a press conference, "This was not stand your ground. This was not justified. This was simply wrong." Still, Florida's stand your ground law hung heavy over the case, a controversial policy that allows people to use deadly force if they believe they are in danger. For days, the community waited as investigators built their case, gathering witness statements, forensic evidence, and surveillance footage from nearby homes. 5 days later, Susan Lorincz was arrested and charged with manslaughter with a firearm, culpable negligence, and battery. She pleaded not guilty. Her defense attorneys repeated that she was acting in self-defense, that she feared for her life in her own home. But prosecutors argued she had provoked the confrontation, that she had a history of calling the children racial slurs and making threats, and that she had no reason to pull the trigger. For AJ's family, the legal process was a slow, painful climb toward justice. Her 4 children were left without their mother. Their world turned upside down overnight. Friends and community members started fundraisers, held candlelight vigils, and spoke about her laughter, her warmth, and the way she always encouraged her kids to dream big. Meanwhile, the debate across Florida grew louder. Was this another case of bias, of prejudice, disguised as fear? Or was it simply a tragic misunderstanding gone too far? To the people who knew Ajike Owens, the answer was clear. She was trying to protect her children, not threaten anyone. As the months passed, court hearings began. Each one drew crowds of supporters, activists, and journalists. Susan Lorincz sat quietly beside her attorney, sometimes weeping, sometimes staring blankly ahead. The prosecution presented a clear timeline: repeated complaints, angry outbursts, and a fatal decision made behind a locked door. Ajake's family sat in the courtroom, holding hands, waiting for truth to break through the legal noise. This was more than just a case. It was a reflection of something larger, about race, fear, and the human cost of anger left unchecked. Neighbors who once stayed silent began to speak. Some admitted they had heard shouting between the 2 women before. Others said they had seen Lorincz yelling at Ajake's children for months. A few even said they felt uneasy but never thought it would come to this. And that's the haunting part of this story. How many times do we see signs, flashes of hostility, unspoken resentment, and brush them off as nothing? How often do communities ignore the slow build of tension until it breaks? For the Owens family, life would never return to normal. AJ's children were now growing up with a void no amount of justice could fill. Her mother became their guardian, determined to keep AJ's memory alive, to make sure her name wouldn't just fade into another headline. National organizations, including the NAACP, stood beside them, calling for reform, compassion, and change. But as 2024 approached, the trial still loomed. Lorincz remained in custody, awaiting her day in court, while her lawyers insisted she had been painted unfairly in the media. Public interest waned for a moment, as stories often do, but in Marion Oaks, every sunset still carried the echo of that single gunshot. The one that took a mother's life and left a community fractured. In the quiet that followed, questions still hang heavy in the Florida air. What does it mean to feel safe in your own home? What happens when fear and prejudice collide? And how far can one person's anger go before it becomes deadly? The days following Ajike Owens' death were filled with disbelief. Marion Oaks, a quiet Florida community once known for backyard cookouts and friendly smiles, now found itself at the center of a national conversation. Reporters lined the streets. Camera crews stood outside the courthouse, and the faces of AJ's 4 children appeared on television screens across America. The tragedy had become more than a local story. It had become a reflection of something that so many people across the country recognized too well. The phrase, "the perfect neighbor," began appearing in news headlines and social media posts. A painful irony, because, for years, Ajike Owens had truly tried to be one. She believed in community. She believed in love thy neighbor. She never wanted conflict. And yet, it was her neighbor who would take her life. As the investigation deepened, a clearer picture began to form, one painted by 911 calls, witness accounts, and a long history of tension that had gone unaddressed. Deputies found that Susan Lorincz had contacted law enforcement several times in the months leading up to the shooting. Each time, she complained about Ajay's children playing too close to her property. Each time, officers found no crime, no danger, just children being children. But behind those reports was something uglier. Neighbors told investigators that Lorincz had shouted racial slurs at the children. She had told them to get off her lawn, called them names no adult should ever call a child, and threatened to hurt them if they didn't stay away. Several neighbors confirmed they had heard her yelling before, even warning AJ about it. Yet nothing was ever done. It was brushed off as a dispute between neighbors. That pattern of minor complaints ignored until tragedy strikes became a central part of the case. Prosecutors argued that Lorintz's anger was not born in fear, but in prejudice and resentment. That say wasn't defending herself, but rather acting on hostility she had nurtured for years. In court filings, prosecutors revealed that on the night of the shooting, Lorincz had called a friend and said she was tired of those kids. That detail would later haunt the trial, because when she fired that gun through a closed front door, it wasn't a random act of panic. It was the culmination of every hateful word, every confrontation, every time she looked at her neighbors and saw not people, but threats. For AJ's family, the legal process was a storm they never wanted to face. Her mother, Pamela, suddenly became both a grieving parent and a voice for justice. She attended every hearing, often holding Ajay's youngest child in her arms. When asked how she found the strength, she said, "I have to, for my daughter, and for every mother who's ever been told to stay quiet." Community leaders began to rally. The story reached national networks, CNN, NBC, ABC, and across social media. The hashtag Justice for AJ Owens spread rapidly. Celebrities shared her story. Public figures spoke out, and advocacy groups began to call for reform of Florida's self-defense laws. The phrase, "stand your ground," once again found itself under fire, because too many, it seemed to have been twisted, meant to protect, yet too often used to excuse unnecessary violence. Sheriff Billy Woods continued to address the public with care. He said, "This is not a case of someone standing their ground. This is a case of someone standing behind a locked door, shooting through it, and killing an unarmed mother." Those words resonated. They drew a clear line between fear and prejudice, between defense and aggression. In late 2023, the pre-trial hearings began. Lorintz's attorneys argued she had been threatened and believed AJ was breaking into her home. But forensic experts testified that there was no evidence AJ ever touched the doorknob. In fact, residue testing showed the bullet's trajectory went straight through the middle panel of the door, fired from inside, at close range. The scene spoke louder than any claim of fear could. Witnesses recalled hearing Ajay's voice moments before the shot come, asking why Lorincz had thrown something at her kids. Then came silence. Then, the gunshot. The courtroom became heavy with emotion as the prosecution played recordings from 911 calls and neighbors' cell phones. In one call, a neighbor's voice trembled. "She's been shot. The mom, please. Send help." The sound of Ajake's children crying in the background left many in tears. Even seasoned journalists admitted they had to look away. Meanwhile, the Owens family began working with community organizations to honor Ajake's life through action. They launched the Ajike Owens Foundation, dedicated to helping single mothers and advocating for peaceful conflict resolution in neighborhoods across America. Their goal was not just justice in one courtroom, but awareness in every community, to remind people that empathy, communication, and understanding must always come before violence. Months later, in the spring of 2024, the case reached a pivotal moment. Prosecutors presented a detailed timeline of Lorincz's actions before and after the shooting. They showed text messages, audio clips, and witness testimony establishing that she had been angry that day, not scared. They played police interviews in which she admitted yelling at the kids and throwing the roller skates, and when asked if she regretted it, she said, "I didn't mean for it to go that far." Those words hung in the air like a confession that wasn't one. When Ajake's oldest son took the stand to describe what he saw that night, his small voice echoing through the silent courtroom, even the judge appeared visibly shaken. He told the jury, "Remember, every decision in this room carries the weight of truth and consequence." As testimony closed, both sides made their final arguments. The prosecution spoke of anger, bias, and choices. The Lorincz made a series of conscious decisions leading up to that moment. They reminded the jury that AJ was unarmed, standing outside, asking a question no one should die for. The defense countered with fear and self-preservation, painting Lorincz as a woman alone, frightened, and overwhelmed. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned. The courtroom fell silent. Lorincz sat still, eyes lowered, as the verdict was read. Guilty of manslaughter with a firearm. Not murder, but a clear declaration that her actions were not justified. Gasps and sobs filled the room. Age's family held one another, crying quietly. It wasn't full justice, but it was accountability. A message that life and truth still mattered. In her victim impact statement, Ajake's mother addressed the court. "My daughter did everything right. She worked hard, raised her children with love, and respected her neighbors. All she wanted was peace, and that peace was stolen." Her words carried the pain of every parent who's ever lost a child to senseless violence. When the sentence came to 5 years in prison, there was no applause, no triumph, just quiet, heavy relief. Outside, Pamela told reporters, "Justice is not about revenge. It's about making sure this never happens again." And that's the legacy AJ Owens left behind. Not just grief, but purpose. Her story sparked community programs, inspired legal discussions, and even influenced local outreach efforts in Florida neighborhoods. People began organizing neighbor talks, small gatherings meant to bring residents together to listen, to understand, and to prevent conflicts from ever turning deadly. To this day, the Owens family continues to speak in schools, churches, and community centers, reminding people of Ajake's story. They tell it not as a tale of tragedy, but as a lesson in humanity. Because AJ's legacy isn't. The moment she died, it is the way she lived. Kind, loving, protective, the perfect neighbor. In the broader picture, her story exposed a truth that is hard to face, that sometimes the danger doesn't come from strangers in the dark, but from the people who live next door. It forced America to look again at its laws, its fears, and its divisions. It reminded everyone that behind every headline is a family, and behind every tragedy, a choice. Today, the house where it all happens still stands. The porch has been reaped, the flowers in the yard have grown back. But for those who pass by, the memory lingers, quiet, invisible, and permanent. Neighbors still talk about that night, about how fast everything changed. And in those hushed conversations, one truth echoes. Once fear turns into hate, there's no fence high enough to keep it out. So when you think of Ajike Owens, don't just think of her death. Think of her courage. Think of the mother who stood up for her children, who believed that right would always outweigh wrong. Think of the light she brought to a quiet Florida street that'll never forget her. And as we close this story tonight, remember, evil doesn't always arrive with a stranger's face. Sometimes it's the familiar smile across the yard, the voice you've heard 100 times, the neighbor you thought you knew. This was The Perfect Neighbor, the story of Ajike Owens. Thank you for watching, and as always, stay safe, stay aware, and take care of each other.